Basically, we arrived just past midday in Jemena, and the trip to the camp was guesstimated at 5-6 hours, so it was going to be far too late to get there. Various permissions and stamps and passports had to be still done, so we stayed over the first night in Jemena before going through in the morning. We left the following day. The road system is basic to say the least, and the trip was a good 5 hours of grueling cross-country stuff down south towards the actual area where the elephant are on the Chari River. We arrived, went out straight away that afternoon to look for the Ellie, couldn't find, but at least had a good look at the area and realized that we were going to be working in some pretty difficult conditions. And so it was only the following day that we actually got to see the first wounded elephant.
People that were assisting you, did you have a good team of assistants to help you? Did they know where the elephants were, or?
Unfortunately, Megan, they didn't really. There was an idea of where they were, and we had to ask the local community for help to finding where the elephants actually were, particularly the injured one. The team is very well-meaning, but very unskilled and really not capable of monitoring them in a meaningful manner. And they don't have communication equipment. They have very basic stuff as well. We eventually got villagers to point out where she was, and she was standing on her own by the river, unable to move very far. She'd only moved apparently around about 30 to 80 meters in the last 5 days. So she was quite aggressive.
Shame, that's very short distance.
Yeah, but close to the river. She stayed by the water. Her injury is horrific, and despite everything, I think, it'll be up in the air whether she survives or doesn't, to be informed. However, once we found her, it was a matter of tailoring a dart and drug cocktail that would suit that Ellie, compromised, injured, so I reduced everything markedly and gave far less than I would perhaps have done for an elephant here. However,
that's an interesting point. I mean, it just shows you that you would need to be very skilled and experienced in order to treat this kind of situation. Besides the terrain being so difficult and shooting from the ground, you also would need to know how to assess the situation as it's happening, and then what drugs to administer in order to make it.
Very much. Yeah. Those elephant there, it's the end of the dry season. They are hunting far and wide for forage to eat, and there's not a lot for them to eat. They're very tall elephants there, but quite thin. So tall and thin elephant basically was something different to what we see here generally. Darting her wasn't particularly difficult because she's not hugely mobile. I was able to get behind her and stick a dart in, and she went down very smoothly and nicely. It took around about 8-9 minutes, which is kind of what I anticipated with her. And then we looked obviously for the bullet wound, which is very obvious. I used a metal detector scanner to have a look at what we had there. Unfortunately, the bullet had fragmented into lots of pieces. To try and chase them and remove them individually would have not solved the issue at all. Drainage was a huge problem. The wound was closing up and it was full of pus, so I made a massive hole in the skin and in the musculature over the wound. We scraped it all out, we flushed and cleaned and flushed it until it became a clean wound. I then filled up.
How do you do that? How do you just with liquids, water, antibiotics?
Yeah, with various flushing solutions that are designed for wound flushing. A small amount of peroxide to help drive it out.
And you'd taken all of this with you? I mean,
took it all with us, and we used long pipettes or long AI catheters. Actually, they're used in cattle. We found they work very well in rhino gunshot wounds here in South Africa. So we used that to get it right into the wound. Flushed the debris out, cleaned it up, and then gave her lots of antibiotics and lots of painkillers, and she got up very well and looks good. My biggest concern, and the concern that I expressed at the time, was that she was not able to move far enough to feed properly, and that the villagers there had to be roped in to help feed that elephant.
So what were they doing? Were they cutting down foliage for her and things? Or?
Megan, I think it happened for the first day, and unfortunately I don't think that there was sufficient organisation there to ensure that perhaps that elephant had had food every single day. I have had reports since that she is discharging quite a lot from her wound and obviously has lost more condition. So I'm afraid, I'm fearful that despite our intervention that she may or may not survive this process. One of the conditions was that I stayed on long enough that we were able to do a second treatment, and that's exactly what we did. We flushed exactly the same again. The wound was clean this time round.
So that's a good sign in itself.
In itself, yes.
Yeah. But the lasting damage from the initial wound and everything would have put her in a bad position anyway.
But because of the drought, because of the end of the dry season, the only thing that she had a constant of was the river, and in order to stay close to water, she was away from forage. So I'm not sure that sufficient food was going to be able to be given to her to maintain.
Okay. And when you say the villagers could feed an elephant, like, I mean, are those elephants quite accepting of people being close to them then, or not really?
They live in a community. I mean, they really do, and they have people working around them all day long. And
what kind of distance between the people?
They're not very respectful of the distance between the ellies, especially when it's wounded like that, because they know obviously it can't harm them. So they were within 30, 40 meters of that elephant a lot of the day.
That's incredible.
And she was in some of their old fields, so it wasn't like they were intruding on her territory. She was in theirs, and they were going about their daily work.
And is this how these elephants generally are in that area? Is that how they intermingle all the time?
Those elephants appear to be constantly in and amongst the community there, and apparently obviously do a lot of crop raiding during the crop season when the rains come, which is shortly, and then into sort of December, January, when the crops come to fruition. Apparently the elephants do a fair amount of damage, and villagers get trampled in the process of trying to protect their crops.
And has nobody done anything to stop that with bees, for instance? And
one has to look at what Chad is. It is a country that is seriously financially strapped. It is on the back foot big time. It is facing an insurgency problem from Boko Haram and various other extremist Islamic groups. It has no money. There's a will to want to do something for their wildlife. There's just no resources to do it. None whatsoever. They have no vehicles, no anti-poaching units, very little in the way of game guards. In fact, they use army individual soldiers who are not trained game guards. Again, I looked at it and I discussed it a lot. One has got to use the existing resources that are available in that country, and perhaps the biggest and most experienced resource that is there is African parks. They're at Zakuma already. So to utilize their expertise and knowledge, I think would be certainly one of the first places I'd start. I believe they are stretched with what they have already on their hands, so looking after a non-designated park area would probably be an impossibility. But some of their resources could certainly be potentially deployed to help. The first thing I think is we need a research project. We need to know how many elephant there are, where they go, what they eat, and what their impact is on the local community. And is it the local community that has a problem with the elephant, or is it extraneous poachers coming in from the likes of the countries that surround Chad?
Do you think that there's a possibility that those elephants have been shot by locals rather than by terrorists, for instance?
It's difficult to say. I doubt it, because the firearm situation in Chad is very closely controlled by the government. It is perhaps their biggest driving force there, is that they keep their populace unarmed. So I think they are most likely, and certainly from the information we got from Stephanie, that they are most likely people coming from outside the area and poaching and then going out again. So my thought would be to utilize the existing resources of African parks, if they are able to and capable of, to set up some form of research project there, so that one knows what one is dealing with and decides how much importance this elephant herd has. Suspicion is that it probably has a high importance, that there are large numbers of elephant, We don't know how many. And if there are, they would certainly require some form of protection, whether it's the declaration of a protected area around them, or whether it's the establishment of, or including the establishment of an anti-poaching unit. But realistically, the Chadian government would not be able to fund an anti-poaching unit. This would have to come from the international community, be funded by and run by international community members in conjunction with the government. Absolutely, because they're very much keen to be hands-on, but have neither the knowledge nor the hardware to do it as such. Sadly, SOS Elephants has either not had the resources or the know-how to actually conduct a proper elephant survey. I think they have done their level best to try and protect those elephant in whatever way by raising awareness, and I think that's really where they've probably succeeded the most, is they've raised everybody's awareness. What they need is an injection of knowledge, know-how and money, so that research project can be initiated, an APU can be established, and discussions can be held with the Chadian government to set up a protected area around those elephants. If they're unable to protect them there, I think that probably a major translocation to a protected area would possibly be an option. However, from a logistics point of view, to work in Chad and move anything from 250 to maybe 500 elephant to a protected area like Zakuma is probably a pipe dream.
Yeah.
It's unlikely to happen. Even here in southern Africa, where we have the resources, that whole Malawi translocation has cost a fortune. Nevertheless, it's been very successful. But we're now talking of something the other side of the equator, in an area that is wrecked by civil unrest and wars and various terrorist groups running around, just to add to the mix the fact that we just don't have the infrastructure to support it. The second most important thing is then to go in and educate the local populace on how to avoid elephant conflict, or to reduce or to minimize the elephant conflict. There are many ways that have been used through Africa, with the use of capsicum, beehives, exclusion fencing, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things that could be done, but there are no resources. One has to remember that Chadian government is on its bootstraps. It does not have another cent to spend. Wildlife, I'm afraid, does not
Come into it.
form a priority. Understandably. They can't even deliver basic services to their populace, so wildlife certainly comes second. So I think that what comes out of a trip like this is that obviously it's humanitarian initially, to try and relieve the suffering and discomfort of those elephants. But more importantly, it's been a great fact-finding time where we've actually, I think, established certainly some of the needs, and at least there's a way forward that that if we put our heads together and use existing resources, I say, do not want to discount African parks there. I think they do a wonderful job throughout Africa. Their resources are already deployed in that country, and I think some discussions with them would be wise, and see whether A, they have the interest or the ability to help out in that situation. Failing that, obviously, to look at establishing an independent research project, followed by hopefully things like a rolling APU unit, as well as community education and the establishment of human-elephant conflict mitigation workshops, etc. And try and allow the community there to live with the elephant, perhaps even derive some benefit from it. And ultimately in Africa, unfortunately, the local community doesn't develop or doesn't get a benefit from having wildlife around them, and they're only a negative in their lives. The chances of keeping them preserved and conserved is very small. If one would use the local populace with some sort of informed, well-educated, trained APU members who would form cells of locals to do the job. you know, one has to look at it with totally different eyes to a lot of other places in Africa. And I've lived and worked in many, East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. And I have to say that the challenges of working in a country like Chad, never mind many of the other things, remembering that you're working in 45 to 47 degree heat for most of your day there, that in itself is a major issue, you know, trying to deal with elephant. The lack of resources, the lack of basic land transport, never mind air transport. There is no form of air transport there whatsoever from a wildlife point of view. In other words, no helicopters available to assist with aerial surveys, darting of elephants, moving of elephants away from problem areas. All things that could be, with a bit of funding and some public participation, together with the Chadian government, could prove to be means of conserving probably some of the last remaining major elephant herds in central sub-Saharan Africa. SOS Elephants in Chad is run by Stephanie. Stephanie has a team of a number of youngsters from the community that have, I think she has 2 motorbikes, that probably one of which is functional from time to time. They seem to go out down the roads and basically look to see where the elephant are and observe the herd from time to time, particularly when they cross the main roads and go to drink at the river. They're able to obviously identify elephant that have been injured, and I think that's how eventually they did find those ones that have been shot. And I think they're a very well-meaning bunch of guys, but unfortunately they are very undertrained, under-resourced. Could do with a big upgrade in training and expertise there. I think the intention is wonderful. I think the execution is understandably way under par. The living standards in Chad were something that are a bit of an eye-opener. I mean, even as a youngster and having been through various military situations, I don't think I've lived in much more primitive situations. There's a total lack of, there's no electricity, there are no decent roads. Accommodation is very basic. It is local construction, sort of reed roofs and sort of mud, stone type walls. There are no refrigeration facilities, so keeping drugs is a bit of an issue there. Keeping meat and any form of fresh produce, so everything is either tinned or dry food, and then you reconstitute it. Listen, it's a harsh environment to live in. It's a challenge for anybody, particularly from a more developed country, to go there and live like that for any long period of time. However, I don't believe that those issues can't be overcome quite easily, and with a little bit of organisation. And I think that's probably where the biggest issue is some form of structured organisation with a goal, a set of goals, and a set objective. I think SOS Elephants has a big buy-in from the Chadian government, and the connections are good. And I think utilising those connections with perhaps extraneous expertise and funding would probably produce a whole heap better results than we're getting at the moment, which is really not much more than an awareness program to the world. So the first elephant, because she was relatively range bound, was found very quickly, and we were able to treat her. Her injuries are severe, very, very severe. She's shot high up in the leg, just through the elbow joint or around the elbow joint. There are bone chips there, so there's no doubt that the elbow has been injured. The chances of re-establishing a normal life are slim. However, we were not in a position to be able to do anything more other than to open up those wounds, increase the drainage, antibiotics, painkillers, and hope that she has sufficient feed and nutrition to see her through the healing process. Failing the feeding, she's not going to survive that process. And unfortunately, I think that is going to be the infection and the wound. I believe we've taken care of. However, the other care, and the reality is there's nowhere to take those elephants. They have to live where they are. The second elephant proved to be a major problem in that nobody could find her. No one knew where she was. Ultimately, when we suggested that a reward system to the community might produce results, within hours the elephant was found and we were with her. She was aggressive, not an easy elephant to deal with. It appeared that she'd been taking care of one or maybe even two calves, but that she'd isolated herself for that particular afternoon. One has to dart elephant on foot in that sort of terrain. It is hazardous. It does put people and property in jeopardy, and it doesn't make it easy to do. Having done them before in various situations, we were able to obviously dart her, pull her down. Luckily, we were able to enlist the help of the community. She went down on the wrong side, and we were able to roll her over on the correct side. Again, a much also gunshot wound, also most likely AK-47. The theory being is that these poachers don't have the firepower to kill elephant with their relatively small caliber military weapons, so they shoot them in the leg, leave them and wait for them obviously to become weak, separate from the herd, and then they're able to finish them off later.
What a terrible death.
It's absolutely appalling, to be honest, and even more appalling is that the amount of tusks these elephants have. If it was 6 inches, it would be a lot.
Why do they have small? Is it just how they are? I mean,
I think poaching in Africa has wiped out our tuskers, our big tuskers. So we're now left with elephants with either no tusks or very small tusks. And
that's a very interesting point. Right?
And the first elephant was a young one. The second one was an adult, and she had very small tusks too. And genetically, I'm pretty sure that this is as a result of human selection, pressure against elephants with large tusks. So sadly, she was also badly injured, this second elephant. However, the wound was much lower down, and she was much more mobile than the elephant that was named Stephanie, eventually, the first one. I was able to treat the second elephant, but only once because we were due to fly out the following day. Unfortunately, I would really think that for me to make a major difference from a veterinary point of view, I would probably need to be there 6 to 8 weeks to treat those ellies. And that 1 to 2 treatments that we were able to do certainly have helped them. However, it will remain to be seen whether it was going to be successful in the long run, because there was so much against those poor elephants. Meg and I was made aware sort of towards the latter part of the planning that we may well have some orphans there, and I was delighted to hear that there was an elephant calf specialist coming from Zimbabwe who'd had lots of experience. I hadn't met her before, a lady called Roxy Dankworks. She's got an orphanage, rehab centre just outside Harare in Zimbabwe. So she met me at the airport with Stephanie, and we got on well. We planned basically what we were going to do and how we were going to try and do it. Obviously we had no idea what the ground conditions were going to be like. The first thing was the treatment of the young elephant with the bad shoulder, or with the bad elbow injury. And Roxy was my right-hand nurse assistant, and I must say she made the task hugely easier for me, and a lot more professional for us, because she has got a lot of hands-on experience with similar treatments, and so I was very glad to have her back up there. We looked for elephant calves, and we in fact found 2 elephant calves that were not far from the herd. Their condition was good. I tracked them back to the herd, and we were chased off by various herd members that came forward, and the calves went back to the herd and were part of the herd. During the 10 days that we were there, we monitored those calves on a number of occasions, either through community hearsay and through obviously the odd visual that we did get. we decided that the 2 elephant calves, one being large enough to actually be fending for itself, and the second one appeared to have not lost any condition during that period and was therefore obviously being fed. To pull in those 2 calves and put them into a captive rearing situation under the rather primitive conditions that they have in Chad, we both, that's Roxy and myself, both felt that it would not be in those elephant calves' interest to do so, and that they stood a far better chance remaining with the herd and continuing with the herd. That's not to say that the poaching crisis won't lead to an elephant calf crisis at some stage. And there again, basic facilities need to be constructed before you start looking at taking in a calf. A simple boma, shelter, expertise, and food. Now Roxy arrived with 60 kilos of milk, all the various supplements. I took some through from here in South Africa for her as well, all of which we have left with Stephanie should the need arise that she's got to try and hand rear an elephant. We certainly did our level best to impart the knowledge that was necessary to do the basics to begin with, and she has access to us through the internet and cell system, and we can help her through any of those sort of issues. However, I think if you're going to do it successfully, you're going to have to set up a facility there. And again, that's one of the parts of the study and the research project, identifying, is there a need for an elephant orphanage in that area? Would it be achievable, and would it achieve a conservation value? Would it actually conserve elephant in a meaningful manner? In other words, could we reintroduce them back into the wild again? Because there's little or nowhere in Chad for a hand-reared elephant to go unless it's able to go back into a wild situation. So the reality is, we've got to look at it and say this is different to the rest of Africa, and certainly to southern Africa, far more primitive, and therefore one has got to develop a different set of standards and values for them. As far as help went, Roxy was obviously very, very useful. We have both worked with elephant before, so it was relatively simple. In fact, our biggest challenge was finding the elephant. And that's actually what took up the majority of our time and bone-breaking travel up and down horrendous roads looking for these elephants. In heat that was far from conducive for working. I don't find living in Chad easy, but it's certainly possible, and if one has got a goal and you are supplied with a few basic requirements, I think you can do quite comfortably there. You don't need anything fancy. Decent vehicle, some form of refrigeration, and I think a mobile camping type situation would probably be the best there. Set up camp wherever the elephant are, because the biggest hassle was 3 hours and a bit drive there, drive around for a couple hours, can't find them, 3 hours back to the camp again. It was such a waste of time and effort, and grueling. Knocked the hell out of you. By the end of the day you were finished with traveling like that. But if you went to an area, set up camp, stayed with the elephant, you're there, you don't drive another 3 hours the next morning because they're there, right there, and then you can. We need to ambush these elephants as they come to water in the morning early. We just never got there in time. So a lot of time was wasted, a lot of energy was misdirected, and we did the level best we could under the circumstances.